Okay.
That's it. Hi, I'm Andy from EasyRink. I'm back with Helen Sanderson from Wellbeing Teams, and we're carrying on our work on the one-page organisation. So last time we were together, Helen, we talked about the purpose of your work, what matters in terms of the values, who your stakeholders are and what matters to them, and what you can do to help them make a difference in their world. And we started to talk as well around the core capabilities, the things you need to be brilliant at, and also the support capabilities, the things that enable you to do that work to be brilliant. So today we wanted to talk about how are you going to make sense of the work you're doing to spot the opportunities to do better, or to just identify the areas that you're doing brilliantly already and celebrate that. Okay.
Thank you.
So with that in mind, I'm going to share my screen like I did before, and we'll have a look. Okay, now somewhere here, I should have, there we go. Can you see that now?
Yes, I can, yes.
Okay, great. So following on from last time, I started to fill this in a little bit with some of the work we've done, but we're now going to be looking down at this bit down here, which is what are the mechanisms that you're going to use in your organisation to make sense of how well you're doing, spot issues and opportunities. Mm-hmm. All right. So to help us think about that, I thought I'd just start with 3 layers and 4 questions for each layer. So if I jump down here, at the different levels of individuals in their role, teams in your organisation, and as your organisation as one whole, I want us to think about how will those individuals, teams of the organisation ensure that they're focused on what matters? How will they know how they're doing? How will they access support, and what sorts of support do they need? So for instance, I know you've got coaches, but you've also got information and data. And how would they escalate issues if they're stuck at any point? Mm-hmm. So could we just start to work through those for some of your key roles first? So I know in terms of the wellbeing teams themselves, you've got wellbeing workers. So that's one of your core roles, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. So if we think of ourselves as a wellbeing worker, given the work you've already done around, what matters, things like the initial conversation and so on, how would you imagine that someone in the wellbeing worker role would stay focused on what really matters? What mechanisms do you have, or do you intend to have for that?
And that's specifically around the initial conversation?
Not specifically, but around their role in general.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess it needs to be a golden thread that starts right at the beginning of recruitment, where we talk about what matters in the role and who we're looking for, and then how we bring that thread forward into induction. So in induction, we spend a lot of time looking at our values and our purpose, and the promises that we make to people we support, and the promises that we're making to wellbeing workers. So I guess what matters to us is around our values, purpose, and promises. And then the training and support that we give people, and what we expect to see at the end of probation, focuses on what matters. And again, is that golden thread back to the description of the role. So if the role clearly describes what matters, and if our induction process enables people to do what matters, and if what we are checking out with people through probation also focus on matters, then that should help enormously. But it's what happens on a day-to-day basis that really matters, isn't it? How people are using our values and our purpose to make the day-to-day decisions that we do. So at the moment, the way that we're trying to do that is 2 ways really. One is in buddy meetings. So everybody spends an hour with their buddy each month, and we've got a set of reflective questions that try and focus on what matters and ask questions about how confident people feel in relation to different elements of their role. So that's part of it. And the tactical meetings. So this is almost like a mini case review for the people we support, as well as a holacracy tactical meeting where you're raising tensions and addressing them. So I think those reinforce what matters. I think the other thing is the data that I collect and how I share that back with the team through my quarterly report, and what people tell us PCOM. So we use a monthly, in the rest of the world it would be called a staff satisfaction or a staff engagement questionnaire. Ours is specifically around the promises that we make to people to find out how well we're doing it. But that's more about how I make sure the coaches are focused on what matters, as opposed to well-being workers.
Okay. So let's come to the coaches in a minute then. But if I just play back what I'm hearing for wellbeing workers, so you've got a number of mechanisms that are about setting wellbeing workers up for successfully focusing on what matters. So induction, training, and then the kind of sign off at the end of probation,
yes,
which makes sure that they're at least clear around what matters. But then in terms of helping them to make sure they put that into practice, you've got your buddy meetings, which bake in reflective questions around how well are we doing, what matters. You've got the mini case review tactical meetings, but you also provide them with information through the quarterly report that you prepare that helps them understand how they're doing. Is that right?
Well, the quarterly report is how we're doing as a team, and it says about how we're keeping our promises. When things have gone wrong, what have we learned from them? So we'll track how many incidents have there been, how many complaints have there been, how did we learn from that, what are we doing differently as a result of what we've learned. So if one of our values is about, how we keep improving and curiosity about how we can get better, what the report does is say, this is what we're finding out about how we can keep getting better. But it's then having the feedback loop that when something has happened. So for example, the process that we've got around complaints is we get a complaint, we investigate it, of course we apologise immediately. The coach investigates it with the person concerned, the family member or the individual, and has the conversation with the team member involved. But then at the next meeting, it's publicly raised and says, here's an issue that's, because we track metrics. So one of the metrics is the number of complaints. And if we get one, we talk about them and say, what happens? Can we identify the root cause of that? What do we need to do differently to stop that happening again? And then what needs to change about our policies, processes, where we work together to make it less likely that will happen again. And those are things that are also tracked in the quarterly report.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to try and just pull us back then to just the specifics of just the wellbeing worker in their role, and then we can try and build back in some of these things as we kind of build the organisation up. Is that okay?
Yes, perfect.
So for the wellbeing worker, I'm thinking here not yet in the context of them coming together as a team, but just as an individual doing their job. Mm-hmm. You've set them up for success through induction, etc. You've given them support through buddy meetings and reflective questions, but also through the mini case reviews. Again, just sticking to just this worker doing their work sort of on their own, if you like. What other mechanisms do you have, if any, that help them make sense of their work and spot tensions or opportunities to improve?
So,
so it may be that you've described them all already. I just want to make sure we haven't missed anything before we move on to them as a team.
Well, one of the ways that we identify tension is when somebody enters into a situation they don't know what to do. And we try and preempt a lot of those by having a series of what if cards, which paint scenarios of things that might be tricky. So over the weekend, one or two of us will be on help desk. And that means that if somebody turns up at a situation they're not sure what to do, they phone me or whoever's on help desk. And we then record on a particular channel what's turned up around help desk. And then, so obviously we support the person to think through what they can do. But then we record it. And we have, it's almost like the life cycle of a what if question. We then generate a what if question from that, so that when we keep using what if questions with the team, we're using the actual things that they have got stuck with and keep rehearsing what do we do in those kinds of situations.
Okay, brilliant. So just to sort of make the connection to the questions we've got on our screen at the minute then, so I think what I'm hearing here is that on the first bullet point for individuals, we've got all the work you do to set them up for success from induction, but we've also got these buddy meetings, these reflective questions, and the mini case reviews.
Yes.
They help us answer the second question. they help us sort of reflect on how's it going relative to what I know matters. In terms of accessing support, though, in that third bullet point, what I've got is I've got my buddy who helps me learn. I've obviously got my team colleagues, but also I've got the help desk there.
And the coach, yes, absolutely. So you have your buddy, your colleagues, the help desk, and the coach all supporting you to do that. And the other thing is our paperwork is completely aligned to focus on what matters as well. So I know this sounds, I was going to say ridiculous, Andy, and it would be self-evident to lots of other people, but very often in home care, the paperwork says what matters is managing risk. Whereas our paperwork says what matters is learning what matters to you. And of course we pay attention to risk as well, but we really want to know, what your personal priorities are. So it's how all our systems align is part of how we make sure this happens. I keep feeling like I'm wavering from the point here, Andy, so please keep bringing me back.
No, it's fine. So I'm just, I guess what I'm trying to do here is just build up from the individual that's directly facing the people you support backwards into the organisation. So I think what I'm hearing is we've got some pretty robust mechanisms around supporting those individuals through the help desk, coaching, buddies, what if cards. So in terms of the information they have to do a good job, they've got all the stuff you're giving them in induction. They've got the what if cards. They've got the paperwork that you've described. They've got the reflective practices. And am I right to think that in response to the last question on the screen there about where to go if someone's not sure, they've got the coach, they've got the help desk. Are there others?
Yes, so I have a big issue about how we use policies and procedures in organisations, and I believe that fundamentally in health and care we are mainly using them to cover the back of the organisation, not as a tool to support people to know how to work well. And the reason that I know that is they are usually 150 pages, and often they're given to new colleagues in induction, and they have to sign that they've read them and understood them. And then an organisation might get that out sometime in the future to say, I don't understand why you made this mistake because you read our policies and procedures. And I just think that's wrong. So what we've done instead is, even though people will have access to that, is we've created a much smaller booklet that says, this is how we work. Here's what you do in these situations, here's what you must do, here's what you mustn't do, and here's where to go to for help. So we're hoping there's really clear information about how we keep our promises, what that looks like in practice, and where you go and help. And it's designed to be small enough to carry in the bags that we give people to go to work. But we also, one of the things that we check in probation is that people are confident raising issues and raising tensions in the team meeting. So we'll actually check that everybody has been raising tensions in the team meeting, so that they are demonstrating to us that they're competent in using the self-management process of, here's something that felt really uncomfortable and I wasn't sure why. I talked to my buddy about it and we both decided to raise it at the team meeting. Here's the issue, this is what I need.
Okay, brilliant. And what do you call the carry with booklet, Helen? Does it have a name?
How we work.
How we work. Oh, yeah. Brilliant. Great.
But alongside that, there's the person-centered team plan. So the How We Work is standard across the organisation and relates to policies. It's the easy read version of policies and procedures that actually tells you what you need to do. But the team also has a person-centered team plan that's how they work as a team, which is the agreements that they've made, the team agreements about how they work together. So actually what they do is they grow their personalised procedures manual based on the issues that get raised, and keep adding to that. So for example, there was an issue over the weekend where somebody was off sick and gave quite late notice to the team that she wouldn't be able to make the shift the next day. So I know from talking to the coach that she'll be raising that as a tension at the team meeting to say, what do you want to agree together that if somebody's off sick, how much notice they give? And then whatever the team decide around that will go into the person-centered team plan as their personal procedure for what they think is adequate notice, which might be a bit different to what the rest of the organisation thinks.
Okay, that sounds amazing. Good. Okay, so if I'm a wellbeing worker, then I think what I'm hearing is there's quite a number of inputs that the organisation gives me to help me be clear around what matters. There's a number of support mechanisms and kind of escalation mechanisms I can use to to help me resolve issues or stay clear and stay focused on what matters. And I also have paperwork and processes that surround me that help me to kind of sense check in with others. So I've been writing these as we went, because I knew if I tried to capture them into the template as we went, I would make a mess. So I will update the template with these when we've done with the call.
Thank you. And Andy, what about the really soft stuff? So, for example, on Slack, which is the communication we use, we have a channel called Random, and that's where we post photos of different things. One of the photos that got posted 2 weeks ago was of one of the wellbeing workers who supported somebody to go and meet their sister who was in a care home, and she'd posted a photo of the absolute joy on both of their faces. Now, I think how the coaches respond to that, i.e. how encouraging they are, how they say this is exactly what we're here to do, is part of the softer reinforcement of how you catch people doing great things and how you give a consistent message to the whole of the team that this is a great thing, and make it more likely that it continues. Yeah.
So I guess my take on that in the context of the wellbeing worker is, if I heard it right, that's part of the coaching role, is that right?
Yes. Oh, I see. So that was then so when we pick up the coaching role, how do we bring it? So we'll pick it up there.
Yeah. But I think it's a good spot as well. So within the context of the wellbeing worker, one of their key mechanisms for support is through the coaches, I think, what I'm hearing.
Yes. Well, the coach is giving them feedback and reinforcing great practice, because one of the expectations of the coach is that everybody gets feedback every 7 days about how well they're doing, or things that they need to get feedback on. So I guess that's also how will I ensure that I focus on matters will be the feedback that I get from my coaches, the coaches and my peers.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, I mean, there's a lot there, which is, I suppose, what you'd expect, because you want all arrows pointing at what matters, which is great. So if we just step one level back, we'll come back round to some of the other individual roles you've got, like coaches. But if I think now in the context of the team, so we've got a group of wellbeing workers, and they're going to come together through some mechanisms that you have to help essentially answer the same questions as are on screen, except instead of how will I ensure that I focus on what matters, it's how do we ensure that we focus on what matters. Mm-hmm. So if you think about wellbeing teams, how is it they come together? What are the sort of social spaces, meeting mechanisms or whatever, where they come together to make sense of their work together?
So we have an hour and a half meeting every week. That's for the whole of the team, and we put as much importance on that as we do in visits, so it's scheduled in the rota.
Okay, is that what you call the tactical meeting, or what do you call
just call it the wellbeing workers meeting, but but half of it is inspired by tactical meetings from Holacracy.
Okay, great. And when they come to that meeting, then do you have any mechanisms in place that help them to ensure that meeting is focused on what matters? Is there anything that kind of drives the agenda or creates the focus for it?
Yes, I think there's three main things. So one is we report on various metrics there. So we'll look at whether we've had compliments, complaints, instances, what's going on around sickness, how we're using our hours, and there'll be sort of several metrics around that get populated. And if you believe that what gets measured at least gives the message about what's important, some of that is captured there. Yep. So given that one of the promises that we make to people is keeping them safe, that's why we track instance and things like that. The next thing that we have is a Living Well at Home board, which has got 3 sections: on track, off track, way off track. And every person we support has a linked wellbeing worker who writes the initials of the person they're linked wellbeing worker with on a sticky. And as they come in, they put the sticky where they think the person is: on track, off track, way off track. And one of the first things that happens in the meeting is we look at anybody who's off track or way off track, understand why we believe that's the case, and agree actions immediately about what we can do about that. So I think that's reinforcing helping people live well at home is why we're here, and paying attention to how we think people are doing really matters, and problem solving together is how we work. And then we'll also have things like a check-in round, so knowing about each other and what matters to each other is important. and a moment of mindfulness is part of keep saying your well-being is what matters here too. But then the rest of the meeting is raising and addressing tensions, and we ask people what's getting in the way of them doing great work, and we bring that together as tensions, and we are coaching the team meeting facilitator, which is one of the roles, to go through that very specific process. And at the end, I believe, although I want to double check that this is happening on a regular basis, that the coach gives the team feedback on how well they're doing in self-management, as she's noticed in the meeting.
Okay, so the coach is coaching the facilitator in
Yes.
how to ensure those meetings are productive and focused on what matters.
Absolutely.
Okay, that sounds really cool. And it sounds like you get some nice mechanisms there to make sure that the agenda stays focused on what matters anyway. So so that sounds great. And so if those mechanisms help those meetings to focus on the right things and to have conversations around how's it going, where do the team meetings go if there are issues that are beyond their scope of control? How would they escalate or seek support?
So because the team coach is at the meeting, anything that has arisen from a tension that is outside the scope of what wellbeing workers can do gets escalated to the wellbeing leader, who in this situation is me, by the team coach who's present in the meeting. So that gets escalated to me. I look at what's possible around it, feedback to the team coach, who then takes it back to the team.
Okay.
But do you know what our decision making is, that the way that decisions get made in the team is there's only a very small number of things that I have any control over that they don't. so actually that isn't something that gets used on a really regular basis. An example from last week's team meeting is that the schedulers have been using pads, like iPads, to do the schedule on. And the scheduler told me that actually it's really, really hard to do it on that because there isn't a left click. And the immediate response was for me to order laptops to be able to do it. So it would tend to be bigger resource issues like that that's outside of the budgets that the team hold themselves.
Okay. So I think things like that will help us when we come to the next bit of our one-page organisation template, which is, how do we respond to these issues, tensions, opportunities, and so on. And I think what I'm hearing is you've got principles around decision making, which are about keeping it as close to the sharp end as possible.
Absolutely.
But making it easy to get support where it's needed.
Yes.
Okay. So that all sounds pretty good. So if I just work through my checklist of questions again, I think for the wellbeing teams, I'm hearing we've got some nice mechanisms to keep us focused on what matters, to help us understand how it's going and make sense of that together. Given that I've got a coach in the team meeting with me as a wellbeing worker, and given that the team meeting starts with the metrics, I've got information and I've got support. And I've got a clear avenue to escalate to yourself, Helen, if there's something that we can't agree amongst us. Is that the summary of the wellbeing team meeting?
Yes, that's it really. And the wellbeing teams may sometimes invite the practice coach to come and join a meeting if there's something that's come up that I can't help with, because that's not my role, but the practice coach can. So they can invite people to attend their meetings if they think that's necessary.
Okay. And how would they decide to do that then? Or what would a prompt to do that be, maybe?
So I was present at a team meeting last week, and the scheduler had raised attention about how they dealt with something, and what they decided to do was invite the scheduler for the other team, the first team in Ashton, to come and join them in their team meeting and explain how the first team managed that. So they have the authority to invite anybody. Whether the scheduler in Ashton Team 1 had capacity to do that is a different issue. But presumably if she didn't, she would say, well, let's do a Zoom and record it and share it with people. So the team have the power to make those decisions themselves.
Okay, brilliant. And so, we could go a few different directions at the minute, but I think let's stick with team level at the minute then, and we're thinking wellbeing teams. So they've got this weekly meeting where they're doing the work to make sense and stay on track together.
Mm-hmm.
That we might think of as a sort of tactical meeting. It's, it's happening frequently. Are there other meetings though which are maybe less frequent, where they choose to step back and take a bit of a bigger picture view, or what else do they do?
Every 6 months, but the first one starts at 3 months. So your first one is at the end of probation, and then there'll be one 3 months later, and then every 6 months is a person-centered team review, where we look at what's working and not working, about how we're living our purpose, working within our values, achieving our team agreements. And the whole team will come together and look at what's working, not working, what's important in the future. And that will then generate outcomes or goals that the team wants to work on, to either build on what's working or address anything that's not working. So there's that process. And then every year, although we might do the first in 6 months, we do a process called Working Together for Change, which is where the team comes together with individuals we support and their families, if they want to be part of this, and the commissioners and community leaders as well, ideally. And we take the data from what people tell us in their person-centered reviews is working and not working, what they want from the future, and that we have a full day's process that says, from this, what's this data telling us about what's working for people, what's not working, and what people want to do to change, and then how do we act on that as a community, and what do we, so that kind of sets the strategic direction for the next 6 months, and that comes directly from what's working and not working from people, and where they want to be in the future.
Okay, fab. And in terms of that annual mechanism then, the Working Together for Change, so who would the membership of that be? Because I think I heard you say we've got commissioners, we've got families, we've got those we support, we've got members of the wellbeing team. I'm imagining though the outputs from that could have organisation-wide learning as well for wellbeing, not just at the team level. Is that right?
Completely. So it's a bit like we do with the team meetings, that the team and the community will make the decisions that they can make within their sphere of influence. Of course, that's the joy of having commissioners there, because their sphere of influence is a bit bigger. But if it's things to do with the way that wellbeing teams are organised and function, that's wider than within the sphere of influence of the Wigan teams, that gets escalated again to me and the national advisors.
Okay, great.
But typically, one of the national advisors will be Working Together for Change, and they will then say, I'll take this nationally, and we'll figure out what can happen there.
Okay, fab. So again, I'm telling you what you know here, but just to sort of recap, so there's some really clear structure around individuals that are in the wellbeing worker role, also some very clear structure around the wellbeing team level and their weekly meetings, but then also these, if you like, more strategic stepping back meetings of the person-centred team review and the Working Together for Change. I think what I also heard though is, there's coaching support and there's national advisor support to those mechanisms that mean that things don't get stuck or kind of swept under the rug. Each thing gets acted on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
again, what I'll do when we're off the call here is I'll capture that into our template to sort of show how it fits together. But that's us just going the route of wellbeing workers. Now, I know that you have other roles in the organisation. You've mentioned a few of them. You've mentioned the coaches, you've mentioned the national advisors, you've mentioned schedulers and such. So maybe if we just took your national advisors for a minute and thought from their perspective, what are the sorts of mechanisms for one of your national advisors, and how would they know how well they're doing in their role?
So the national advisors at the moment are me, Emily and Michelle. And because we've been for the first 6 months in the startup phase, what we thought was most powerful in terms of our learning is actually taking some of the roles within the team. So Michelle's been working directly in Wigan as a team coach to learn how the team coach role works in practice, and I've been taking the wellbeing leaders role within Wigan. So we're both occupying two team-based roles, and Emily's been working with another team in Northwich, again taking one of the direct roles, the team coach role. So our first phase of learning has been learning about actually doing the job, and now we're starting to step back and occupy the national advisor role. I'm not sure that's the right term, but to occupy this role And Emily is now supporting our team in Oxfordshire as the national advisor. And from September, Michelle will be stepping back and supporting Trafford. So she'll be stepping out of a direct role within a team into an advisor role. So at the moment, what we do is we meet for a whole day every 6 weeks to take stock of, I guess, a version of the meeting. So over the last 6 weeks, what have we tried and learned? What we're pleased about, concerned about? What tensions are we grappling with? And what does that mean for our structure and how we operate? So even though we've only been operating for 6 months, we already know that we don't need a practice coach and a wellbeing leader, that those two roles need to be combined. So it's almost like every 6 weeks we completely redo how we're working, and we go into version 2. So at the moment, I'm putting the finishing touches to version 2 of everything based on our learning of the first 6 months. And then that will then go publicly on an open Teams website. That means that all of the teams will have access to it, and also anybody outside of the teams who's interested in wellbeing teams will do that. So we have a process of coming together every 6 weeks to say, what have we learned from our work within the teams, and therefore what needs to change about what we're doing. And then we make those changes and go into the next version. And if necessary, we'll use Lumio to do a bigger check-in with the whole of the organisation. So we might present a proposal to the whole of the organisation saying, in our review, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? We haven't done that as yet. Things have been so fluid and moving so quickly. But I absolutely know that there will be situations in the future where we think, actually, we think this, but let's sense check that with the whole of the organisation.
Okay. And as national advisors, Helen, I guess I'm wondering, it sounded like when you talked about the wellbeing workers, like they have massive sort of role clarity around what matters. And I think when we were on the call last time talking about capabilities and things like the initial conversation, what matters around it, it really struck me that there's a lot of clarity around what good looks like in those contexts. For national advisors, is it a bit more fluid at the minute, or have you got similarly clear role definitions so that, when you're not meeting, when you're just out there doing it yourself, you have a really good idea of what good looks like, or how does that work at the minute?
Oh, Andy, I missed out something really important. We have a tactical meeting every week, 9 till 10 on a Friday. So we're doing exactly the same process of what's emerging, what do we need to do, how's that working with our roles. We have specific roles together. So Michelle's responsible for practice, and she's responsible for part of our IT system, which is Navisio. Emily's so essentially, Michelle has overall national responsibility for, are we delivering our promises to people we support, and there's 6 promises there. And then Emily has overall responsibility for, are we delivering our promises to our teams? And we have 10 promises there. So Emily's responsible for team wellbeing and flourishing, and Michelle's responsible for individual people we support wellbeing and the promises that relate to those. And then separately, and Emily's responsible for people planner, I'm responsible for governance and finance and partnerships. So that means I don't need to go back to them if I think this is a great partnership, because it's within my role. So we each know what we can do without having to come back to each other about, and what are the things that we need to decide together. Oh. And the other thing is, we did a colleague letter of understanding to each other right at the beginning where we started last November, to say, this is who I am, this is what matters to me, this is my role, this is what you hold me accountable for, here's how I understand my role. And that's a bit like a role description, that we're saying to each other, here's what you can expect from me, and we'll be doing that on an annual basis.
Okay, Bill. And I'm wondering as well then, for each of those different sort of flavours of national advisor responsibility that you've outlined there, are you using confirmation practices to help each other reflect on that, or how are you approaching that?
I raised as attention last year, as we also, because we communicate on Slack, we have a virtual tactical meeting channel where we can identify tensions that we want to make sure get raised before Friday when we meet. And one of the ones that I raised is how can we firm up what we're doing and be using confirmation practices ourselves before our weekly meeting. So the honest answer is, because this has been fluid and emerging, we haven't done that yet, but that's our next priority.
Yeah, no problems. And maybe in the same space as that, you mentioned, just flicking back to see what you called it, but you have the board that you use in the wellbeing workers meetings for on track, off track, way off track. Do you use something similar to help you focus your mind as national advisors, or is that not something you do?
We have a 12-week plan that supports people to go from induction through to end of probation, and we've got detailed plans for things like our recruitment. We're collecting metrics around our recruitment process, and we have general metrics too. We need to firm that up really, so that every time we have our 6-weekly review, we're looking at the bigger picture ones, and weekly we've been paying attention to some metrics, but we've never quite nailed them in the way that any of us feel comfortable with. So that's kind of what we need to do next.
Okay, good. Fine. So in terms of this section of our one-page organisation, what I'd like to do is just capture from you at the minute all of the different types of roles that you've got, because I know I've not captured them all, and capture the key meeting mechanisms we've not talked about yet without going into the detail of them, and then I can capture them into the template for us to just work through the detail later. Does that work for you?
That'd be great, thank you.
Yeah. So what are the roles we've not talked about yet? We mentioned scheduler en route. Are there other roles within the teams that
Yes.
that exist?
So within the teams, there's a range of roles. So scheduler, meeting facilitator, storyteller is one of them as well. So we've got a range of roles, 5 or 6, but the teams are able to develop new roles as they emerge, and they would typically come out of the team meetings. So one example is in Wigan, they establish a role as the personal protective equipment role, who make sure everybody's got the equipment that they need. So at team level, there's 5 or 6 roles. And then there's a trusted assessor role, a community circle connector role, a team coach role, and a wellbeing leader role. And each of those roles have the essence of their role described, and then 10 or so key elements of the role. And then they've got a confirmation practice document that relates to the elements of their role. And they're coached to do confirmation practices on a weekly basis based on that.
Okay, cool. And in terms of meeting mechanisms then, so we've got the wellbeing weekly meeting, team meeting.
Yes.
We've got the person-centered team review. We've got the working together for change. We've got the National Advisors Tactical Weekly Meeting and the 6 weekly meeting. What have we missed?
So in a local area, so where there's a wellbeing leader, she'll be meeting with the trusted assessor, community circle connector, and team coach regularly to look at the confirmation practices and to raise and address tensions, and that might be either weekly or fortnightly. The challenge here is keeping those roles embedded in the team and not creating a sort of separate, what looks like a management group, because that's not how we want to work. But equally, we know that how those roles work together is pretty critical to the smooth running of wellbeing teams. So at the moment, we're just doing that around confirmation practices and raising any tensions.
Okay, great. And any other meetings that you have that we haven't covered there?
No, what we're moving to is, because we now have things like different roles in teams, and nationally we've got 3 or 4 community connectors, is having separate Slack groups that bring that group of people together so they can be having conversations. And we're looking to set up community of practice roles. So, for example, Emily is responsible for supporting all the team coaches. We have a Slack channel where the team coaches talk to each other. And one of those channels says, how are you handling? So we post there if we've got a tricky situation, people give advice. But she's also going to be doing a monthly call with all the team coaches together that supports them in a sort of community practice style. And probably every quarter they'll get together face to face.
Okay, all right. Crikey, it's a lot, isn't it?
I know, and we're really trying to keep meetings to an absolute minimum and not ever have any meetings for its meeting's sake. But the weekly tactical meeting for the wellbeing workers is where the whole energy of the organisation is focused. So we keep saying, are people on track, off track, way off track, and what
Yes.
tensions are you raising to help us do a better job? So really change needs to emerge from that meeting as the most important one.
That sounds great. Yeah, that's a good way to anchor everything, isn't it? Good. So look, what I propose to do with this, if it works for you, is I'm going to try and take what you've given me, put it into the template and try and just give it a little bit of structure around the conversation we've had, and then we can spot the gaps together. Does that work for you?
Lovely. Thank you very much. I look forward to the next one.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Helen.
Bye-bye.